Well, hello to you all, and a strange one this time. Strange for me talking to you from my own home. But strange for you also, because school must be quite a bit different to what you've been used to. We've all had to move on, some more than others. The last time that I was talking to the people in your school was back in March, 6 months ago nearly. And since then, a lot of things have happened, and people have moved on to other schools, and some people that uh, are here now were in other schools then. Some of you will have met me before, but I guess a lot of you will have forgotten what the storyline was. So, for those who are new and for those who've forgotten, let me just recap on what we've been thinking about over the last few months. There's a wolf called Tovin who was thrown out of his wolf pack. Roaming loose and lonely, he meets up with Tan, who is fishing in a river. And together they go to try and find Tan's wolf pack. On their way, they meet Breck the bear, and then Cleo, an injured cougar, a mountain lion, with her two cubs. When they move on, they discover a forest fire in the next valley, which causes them to rush back because they're worried about Cleo, who, with her injuries, might find it difficult to get away with her cubs. And so the 6 animals are trying to get away when an enormous thunderstorm erupts overhead and causes them to return to Cleo's den, her cave, to shelter. And that's where we left the story, with the animals huddled inside and Breck half huddled under because she was too big to get in. And the story is about moving on, but it's also, if you listen carefully, about respect one for another as well, because that's part of what we're thinking about this term. So, the animals, huddled under that rock, slept as best they could. When they woke up, there was silence. The early dawn light spread eerie orange fingers through the jagged mountain peaks. The lines on much of the upper slopes was punctuated with grotesquely twisted tree stumps, reaching to the sky as if in a silent, agonized plea for help. Tan edged out of the cave, past the still slumbering form of Breck, the fur on the bear's back and hind quarters glistening with droplets of water from the deluge of the night before. She sniffed the morning air. Normally this was the time of day she loved best of all, with the freshness of the vegetation heightened by the fall of rain. This morning, however, the smell that invaded her nostrils choked her and stung the sensitive tissues in her nose and throat. She sat and listened, ears twisting this way and that as she tried to detect any movement, any noise, any bird song. There should have been plenty at this time of the morning, but today there was nothing. She trotted down to the river. As she lowered her head to drink, she caught a scent which made her pause. The water didn't smell right. It was as clear as usual, but there were no fish anymore, and no sign of anything living, either in the water or around it. All very odd. As she stood considering her discovery, she sensed, rather than heard, a movement behind her. She turned to see the cougar, Cleo, watching her warily. "It's not good news, is it?" she murmured, and Tan shook her head. "Most of the trees further up the slopes are gone, and the water here is bad. I don't know what it is, but I don't fancy trying it. So we really can't stay here then. We have to move on. But how far will we have to go?" Tan said nothing. She had no answers. This time the procession moved off with a little less haste than the night before. The early morning sun reflected off the ripples of the water, and, in spite of Tan's warning, the temptation to take a drink was hard to resist. A plan was beginning to form in Tan's mind. She shared it with Tovin. "First thing we need is fresh water. The trees and shrubs on the slopes of those mountains look fresh and untouched by the fire. There must be a stream running down from there." She looked to the west, away from the sunrise and the wasteland behind them. "But that means crossing the river," Tovin observed. "If it's as dangerous to drink as you think, we can't swim across." "I know a place a little way upstream from here," Tan said. "But that means heading back up to where the fire was," Tovin protested. "Well, yeah, only a short way, though. There's a shallow section where we should get nothing more than wet paws." Cleo was still a little nervous of her new friends. Bears and wolves were not normally animals she trusted or respected. But as she tried to encourage her cubs to move on, she was grateful for the company and the extra pairs of eyes to watch out for danger. They moved upstream, and the river banks became steeper. Breck suddenly stopped and sniffed the air. She began to look around and then moved cautiously towards the river. The ground fell away sharply here, and she peered down into a ravine. At one end was a waterfall, flowing into what looked like a deep pool. On the shallow side of the pool were three box-shaped metallic objects stuck beneath a tree trunk. Tan moved up beside the bear. "Human things?" she asked, although she was sure of the answer. "And the cause of the bad water. Maybe even the cause of the fire. Who knows?" Breck shook her head. "Those humans, they're destroying our world," she said sadly. The animals made their way up a slope to the top of the waterfall. Here Tan stepped into the water. "Not here, surely," Cleo protested. "My cubs will get swept over the edge, and I'm not strong enough to carry them across." She gazed at the far side of the river. Over there was the possibility of safety, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. "I've crossed here before. As long as you step carefully, the force of the water is not as strong as you think." "Carefully," said Cleo. "My cubs don't know the meaning of the word." Breck looked at the crossing point for a moment. For the most part it consisted of broad, flat slabs of rock over which the river flowed gently from the left. And to the right there was a drop of some 20 metres into the pool beneath. In most places it was possible to paddle, getting little more than the pads of the paws wet. But there were 3 places where the water had cut deeper into the rock. There it flowed with much more force. 2 of them were easy to jump across, even for the 2 cubs and for their injured mother. Between those 2 was a wider, deeper cut. And that was the problem. The bear led the way out onto the first slab of rock, followed by Tovin, then Cleo and her cubs, with Tan at the rear. At first, the small cut in the rock came and Breck sauntered over. Cleo, even with her injury, was able to jump nimbly over and then encourage her cubs to do the same. The two wolves then crossed after them. Now that they were nearly in the middle of the river, Cleo and the wolves carefully shepherded the cubs as the pull of the current became stronger. Meanwhile, Breck reached the second cut, looked down into the rushing water. Upstream, the riverbed was deeper and the currents made swimming a dangerous prospect. Could Cleo jump across? Perhaps, but not carrying a cub. Breck sighed. She could only think of one solution. Gingerly, she lowered her hind quarters into the rushing water, wedged herself as firmly as she could between the slab of the rock and the smaller submerged rock in the middle of the torrent. She braced her forepaws against the rocks on the other side and lowered her head. Never before have I let a cougar walk all over me. Just make sure you keep your claws in. Cleo looked disdainfully at the bear, half submerged in the water. She turned and stalked away from the cut, circled round, then, with a sudden burst of movement, raced through the shallows and took a leap across the water behind the crouching Breck. As she stretched out in mid-air, she realized she'd made a mistake. The pain of the wound down her left side caused her to give an involuntary yowl. Her front paws barely reached the slab of rock on the far side of the cut, and the rest of her body slammed into the side of the slab, made slippery by the rushing water. Immediately, the current dragged her at her hind quarters, snatched her away from the rock and down into the deeper water. Then, in an instant, she became stuck, wedged firmly between the slab on the one side and the bulk of Breck on the other. Breck turned her head. Pride, she muttered. We've all made mistakes because of that. Cleo nodded. Then, summoning what little strength she had left, she dragged herself out of the water onto the far side of the cut. After that, the crossing proceeded without incident, and they eventually reached dry land on the other side of the river. Tan left the group by the river bank. Cleo was sore from the reopening of her wounds as well as nursing her injured pride. The cubs, sensing their mother was struggling, nestled up to her. Breck and Tovin kept watch for possible danger. After a while, Tan returned. I found a cave. Looks empty, and it's close to a stream. The cave was ideal for the cougar and her cubs. And Cleo noticed rabbit burrows close by. She wondered whether they might be a source of food until she was fit enough to hunt for bigger prey. It's time we moved on, said Tan. We've got a wolf pack to find, if they've survived the fire. And I wouldn't mind a quiet spot to feed and sleep away from all this drama, Breck added. Good luck with that, Cleo replied, a little sourly. But look, she hesitated. This is something I never dreamed I'd be saying to wolves or bears. Never mind both. But thank you. I owe you all for saving me and my cubs. I shall never forget your kindness. Now, off you go, all of you. So think about that on the moving on, the parting of the ways, new adventures. Will Breck and Cleo and Tan and Tobin meet up again? I don't know. We shall see. But in the meantime, as you remember the story, think about the respect, the thank yous. What happens if we become too proud? All sorts of things. But most of all, be ready to move on, whatever's going to happen. We're going to stop and close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you give us all gifts, and we thank you for our friends, and we thank you for new friends. And in these strange times, we ask that you would help us to find the good things, as well as overcome the things that we find difficult. Together. Amen. Well, I don't know when I shall next see you face to face, but you may well see me on a video between now and then. So enjoy your time in school today.